our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people.
We urgently need financial, political and social innovations that enable us to overcome this structural dependency on growth.
We need to change the system. This isn't cleaning up the beaches in the case of plastic a little bit faster. That's vital, that has to be done. But you need to stem the flow.
Go Simone explores sustainable change and the women inspiring it. Who are they? What made them who they are? How do they read the world they live in? Our guests share their story, roots, passions and hopes for the future. They tell us more about the alternatives and strategies they developed to tackle climate change. Our Simone today is Emma Kate Rose. With Emma Kate, we talked about crime management, care holders, converting to organic farming, moral law, relocalizing the food system, reconnecting to the land, and technology for good. Hi, Emma Kate.
Hi, Roxanne. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome here at Go Simone. We are very pleased to have you today. We've mentioned your name a few times in our conversations with previous women.
Okay.
Yes, they've mentioned Food Connect and also the work you're doing on the food scene locally. So it's great to be able to meet you in person today and talk a bit more about what you're doing. You have over 3 decades of experience in working in business, social justice, environmental sustainability, food system advocacy, and political activism. You have a Bachelor of Criminology. In 2006, you co-created a startup developing a car-sharing service in Brisbane. And after selling it in 2008, you joined Food Connect, a social enterprise aiming to create a world where everyone has access to healthy, fresh, ecologically grown food that is fair to growers, eaters, and the planet. You grew up in Sydney. Can you tell us a bit more about your childhood, how it was to grow there, and what kind of childhood you had?
Well, I grew up living next door to my grandmother and my mother's mother, and it was pretty great childhood. We were living in working class Sydney. It was during the era when a lot of Vietnamese refugees were coming to Australia, as well as a lot of Lebanese refugees. And our suburb was kind of, for want of a better term, a bit of a melting pot of lots of different cultures. So I grew up going to school with people from multicultural backgrounds. So that was pretty cool. And living next door to my grandmother and, of course, you know, my aunties and uncles as well, because a lot of them were younger than my mum. So they were still living at home. And it was like a very big extended families. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. So there were just kids everywhere. There was a different kind of perception of public safety back then. Like we would just walk the streets and go to the park, and mum and dad never felt the need to come and check on us. We just played for hours and hours and hours, you know, come home at night time and for dinner, basically. Most of the time we were outdoors.
How were your parents talking to you? What kind of relationship did you have with them? Did you feel you were pretty free to choose to carry your path you wanted to embrace later on?
I guess it was interesting. My father had a lot of difficulties. He had a gambling addiction and was sort of a little bit emotionally unstable at times. So my mum was really the rock of the family, and she was a registered nurse and she supported the family working night shift. So she would juggle the breastfeeding of the children and all of that sort of stuff while bringing an income in for the families. And also living next door to my grandmother, who was quite a strong matriarch, and my aunties, I felt like I had a very strong influence from the female members of my family. It kind of cemented in my mind a little bit about men that they're useful at times, but probably mostly unreliable, which wasn't helpful. When we moved to Brisbane when I was 12, I did all of my high schooling here, and that was pretty tricky because it was trying to adjust from a very different schooling system to one in Queensland, which seemed quite backward. I went from singing the Australian national anthem back to Queensland to singing the Queen's anthem. So it was like we were part of England.
Almost like a different country.
Yeah, it was very strange. And some parts of the language were different as well. And so it was very hard to get used to. But I guess mum and dad just did their best in terms of getting us all through school, which I'm really thankful for. And by the time I finished grade 12, I was school captain. wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do. I was quite passionate about lots of different things, and my parents weren't very supportive. I remember my mum saying, just go to secretarial school, you'll be fine. And I was thinking, well, Mum, like I'm school captain, I did pretty well at school, maybe I could aim a bit higher. So I was the first person in my family to go to university.
Did you have to push a lot for it, or was it?
Well, I had to pay my way.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was no financial help. And in fact, just as I had started university, my parents moved back to Sydney. So I decided to stay. And so I just supported myself through my degree. And
how has your interest for the environment started? I saw that you studied a Bachelor of Criminology. Did you actually work as a criminologist or in a different role after that?
Yeah, I did. I graduated from university quite late because I stopped studying and wanted to work for a little while, and I did that and travelled overseas a little bit. So by the time I finished my degree, I was 25. I worked for the Brisbane City Council for a period of time as a corporate security analyst, and then was recruited by a consultant who, I guess, the best way to describe it was applied criminology. So we would go into places and we had a focus on crime prevention through environmental design. So it was basically analysing crimes after they'd been committed in public spaces and auditing the space around it, and looked for design features and environmental factors that may have contributed to that person being vulnerable in that space and being a target. So it's like a whole theory around.
A whole field.
Yeah. So we did a lot of work in public spaces all over Australia and internationally for universities and local councils and state governments and corporations, and that was a really rich and rewarding career. And I landed in Chile at one point because we were hosting a criminology conference over there, and we did some work in the favelas. And I came back to Australia and said to my boss, I really think we should change tact from doing security management consultancy and sort of the crime prevention and just talking to police to actually talking to communities and asking them what do they want and embedding ourselves a little bit more in community safety. But he was of a different opinion. And so I decided to take a break and have a think about what I wanted to do next.
So how did you progress with your thinking?
It's kind of weird. There was no logical leap from criminology to sustainability. I'd had 2 children by then and divorced my husband and moved back to Brisbane. I was living on the northern New South Wales coast at that point. And I thought I'll just take a break and just study my naval for a few months. And it was then that the movie An Inconvenient Truth came out. I had always been a lover of the natural world and the environment. It wasn't something that was ingrained in me as a kid because I grew up in the city. But when I became an adult, I spent a lot of time in Lamington National Park on the Gold Coast hinterland and did lots of camping and whatever, but it hadn't really gelled with me. I guess when I had my children, when I was pregnant, I was very conscious about what I was putting into my body and made sure that the stuff that I was eating and consuming wasn't harmful, laden with chemicals. So that was sort of part of it. But when I saw this movie, it really hit home, and I just thought, okay, let's do something. Let's do something about this. And looked at my kids and I thought, if what they say is true about the feedback loops that are going to happen in 10, 20, 30 years, that means these 2 little boys are just going to have no chance. So what can I do to try and slow that down or avoid it at all? So I started a climate action group, a community group in suburban Brisbane. So it was a little bit out there for this particular suburb because it was quite conservative. But we soon built our numbers up to around 200, and we would do monthly talks. So I would get experts in to educate us because the government was telling us one thing, but the scientists and the experts were obviously telling us another. So we just went about a program of just educating ourselves and sharing things face to face, because there was a bit of grief and shock and stuff like that about the lack of action. It still is to this day. That was rolling along really nicely, and we were doing actions and contributing to the wider effort. And on the side, I thought, well, I need to make a living as well. So I decided to sell the car, teach my boys how to ride bikes, and we just focused on sustainable transport as our piece of work. And so then I found the concept of professional car sharing service. So I partnered with GoGet, which is a car sharing service in Sydney, to bring the technology up to Brisbane, and started first car sharing service for Brisbane. Brisbane City Council didn't get it.
Oh, at the time,
At
yes.
the time.
I saw it was quite early on.
Yeah, it was 2006, 2007.
Yes.
And I remember sitting in the chairman for the Transport Committee. I remember sitting in his office and he was just grilling me with 20 questions, and I answered them all and everything seemed fine, but then he just didn't get it. And I got a letter from the Lord Mayor a few days later saying, thanks for your contribution. The initiative sounds wonderful. We're not going to give you any public car parking spaces on the street because that would mean that we're giving car park public space to a private corporation. And I said, okay, fine. Well, what's a taxi service then?
Yeah.
And so they couldn't really answer that question.
Of course.
So it just wasn't, they weren't ready for it. They didn't want to hear it. They sort of just branded us as lefty, loony greenies and tried to forget about us. So I've started a conference with a few colleagues where we wanted to showcase all of the solutions. We've got all these problems across society where we're absolutely coupled with fossil fuel. What do we do to decouple from that in education, transport, food? So we went around Brisbane and asked for all the experts to come together and have a whole day at Griffith Eco Centre to talk about that. I met through that Robert Pekin, who started Food Connect like 2 years earlier. And I didn't even hear his talk, but it was of interest because obviously I'd done I thought I had made the switch to good food and understood the concepts, but I had no idea about the food politics side of things. I had no idea about community-supported agriculture. I had no idea about the global food system and all of the inequities that that created. So I ended up having a chat with him afterwards, and then I sort of thought, okay, well, I'd be happy to be a city cousin, which is like a community drop-off pickup point for our customers. So that started, and then the friendship developed into something a little bit more. So I soon fell pregnant with Elsie, our daughter, and sold the car sharing business, and just slowly became more and more involved in Food Connect over the years. Have absolutely love being part of it.
And you since discovered all the problems of the food production.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about, for listeners who don't know about the Food Connect concept?
So it started as a sort of a community project. Robert his story is basically one that we're hearing more and more these days with farmers. You know, there's 72 farmers walking off the land every week. In Australia at the moment, they're twice, if not 3 times more likely to be committing suicide, particularly during this drought. So Robert experienced all of that. He experienced deregulation of the dairy industry, drought and financial hardship, and lost his 4th generation farm. Nearly committed suicide. For some strange reason, he didn't go through with it, thank goodness. And then went on a bit of a journey of what next, and came across the idea of community-supported agriculture, started his own market garden in Tasmania, and really embedded the practices and understood the concept. And then had a lot of interest from across Australia from other farmers who wanted to set up. So he became sort of like a bit of a consultant in CSAs, helping farmers set them up for themselves, which is basically one farmer who and a group of householders or families that pay upfront seasonally for their produce, and the farmer invests that money into growing all the food. And it's not easy growing like 70 different lines of produce that gets harvested weekly with enough variety for people to be consistently happy. So it's a very interesting business model, but also, as Robert describes it, one of the most fascinating and rewarding intellectually, because you're constantly creating and inventing and problem solving. So he took the concept, that one farmer and a number of householders or eaters concept across Australia, and through personal circumstances he ended up in Brisbane, and he realised, and he got involved in the food politics scene here through Friends of the Earth and food justice people, and he decided to join with that community to start a hybrid version, because he knew that for eaters in the city, being so conditioned to get eating whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, that we needed a lot more variety in the boxes and a little bit more flexibility. So we've evolved that project over the years, and we invented our own software because there was no really good e-commerce software back then when they started. So one of our customers, who was a bit of a nerd, designed it for us, and we've progressed since then. So one of the great things about the software is that we ended up having to make a choice as a company. Are we a software company, because there are a lot of food businesses coming to us wanting to use the software, or are we CSA type concept? And we made the decision to donate the software to a foundation. It's called the Open Food Network, and they've ended up going global with it. So
it's an open source software?
Totally open source software, and very strong in Spain and the UK and France, and has just started in the US, and got a lot of support in South Africa as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, yeah. So that was great. And so, yeah, we're basically, for all intents and purposes now, if you go to our website, we are like any other online e-commerce shopping fresh produce. The difference is that we have very strict business rules associated with that. So we pay our farmers 50 cents in the retail dollar, when the industry average is around 5 to 15 cents, which is often below the cost of production. We have a 2-to-1 wage ratio, where the highest paid person can't earn more than double the lowest paid person. We have our mission lock in our constitution. At the moment, we've got an asset lock as well, which means we can never be sold. So Woolworths can't come along and buy us for a big amount of money and then put us on the shelf. So we did that because we needed to get trust from the farmers at the beginning, because farmers have been conditioned by the market and exploited by the market, and there's very little trust left. So we had to show them that these were our business rules and these were our ethics, and that they were locked into the Constitution, and we couldn't operate any other way to get them on board to start supplying us. Yeah.
Do you start seeing the trust back?
There have been times in the business where we have had software disasters, or the Brisbane floods, or the GFC back in 2008, where sales just plummeted, because what happens when there's an economic crisis is that for some reason people think food needs to be sacrificed, and so they go for the cheapest options around. So it was during those times that the farmers supported us by delaying the payment schedule or allowing us a bit of time. And I guess the farmers have been integral to that, and the trust that has been developed over the years. So we often take our customers, our eaters, out on farm tours so that they connect directly with the farmers that grow their food. And we also provide information to customers. If they call us and say, I loved the apples this week, we say, well, here's the farmer's phone number, give him a call and thank him yourself. And also the other way, the eaters, once they go on a farm tour, or once they have an experience with us as a customer for longer than a few months, where they've been able to break those habits and develop new cooking skills, they really get it. The penny drops for them, and they never leave. They're with us for life. And so once we had to move warehouse very suddenly, and we found a suitable warehouse, and we paid the rent 3 months up front, but we didn't have enough money for the bond. So we just went out to our customers and said, if you buy up front for a year, then we could afford to pay the bond. And within 2 weeks, we'd raised $30,000, which was what we needed.
That's
to.
amazing.
Yeah, and so it was time after time through the floods. It's been our customers that have really supported us as well.
The customer base has always
and
been
I guess
there.
they're not even customers, they're really food citizens, because they're participating in a food system that they want, and they don't want to see it fail. They know that it's going to be resilient in times of climate crisis and ecological decline. So, yeah.
In 2018, you raised $2 million through equity crowdfunding to develop Australia's first community-owned local food hub. Why choosing crowdfunding? And also, what is the ambition of the Food Connect shed?
So Rob and I have been looking at a concept in the US which has taken hold with federal funding called local food hubs for quite some time. And 10 years ago, there were probably around 100 of them in the US. Now there's 500. And it was sort of a rural regional renewal project, so that local communities could be revitalised around farming and food. And we love the model because most of these food hubs were owned by the farmers themselves or by run by not-for-profits. And so there was no sort of corporate compromise, I guess. And we've always had a vision of creating a space in our current warehouse, and we've been asking our landlord for years whether he would sell it to us to create a food hub, a replica of what they're doing in the US. Because we had been told by people that had visited Australia from the food hub space, we would host dinners and get them to do a talk and everything, and they would walk around the warehouse and they'd say, you guys are a food hub, you're doing everything that a food hub does in the US, so you should call yourselves a food hub. So a food hub is place-based, and it acts as an aggregator of local and ethically sourced ecological produce, food, and also provides markets for those farmers who want to value add, but also provides facilities on site, so kitchen facilities, food processing facilities for farmers or anyone else who wants to take the produce and value add it into new products. One of the biggest issues in the food system globally at the moment is we've got over a billion people who are obese or overweight, which can lead to chronic disease, which puts huge pressure on the health system, and shorter lifespans. And then on the other side, we've got around 800 million people who are starving every day, going to bed hungry. And at the same time, we produce enough food in the world to feed 12 billion people. And we're up to 7 billion. So it's interesting that we do grow enough food, and there's this sort of mantra out there that we're not growing enough and we need to double our production because blah, blah, blah. And behind that is this mantra of produce as much as you can to make it as cheap as possible. And so the markets get flooded and then it just gets stored. So there's a real issue with distribution across the world. It's all been centralised under these big corporations and governments that use food as a weapon to control their populations. We really saw the local food hub model as one answer to that distribution issue. So by sourcing locally, paying farmers the true cost of production, using farmers that understand ecological methods of growing, so you're sequestering carbon, you're sequestering water, drought-proofing properties, increasing biodiversity, creating healthy soils. If you support them with a stable market, then you can create resilience in the food system and access to affordable, good food. So that has been our driver, and we knew that we needed a place to do that, a place of our own. So we decided to look at equity crowdfunding because the landlord eventually caved in and said, okay, I'll sell it to you. And you've got 1 year to find the buyers. Pretty much straight away, we had 4 ethical investors who were based in Melbourne, 4 white guys, who said, yep, we'll put the money in to pay for this piece of property for you. And Robert came back full of beans from Melbourne saying, success, we've got buyers. They get what we do, we're right. And I said, really, is that going to move the needle? Sure, it's great that we've got buyers, but don't we want the community to own this thing? And how are we going to make that happen? So we looked at equity crowdfunding, which basically allows companies to go out to their crowd, go out to their supporters, their customers, their suppliers, whoever's interested, to contribute financially and actually own a piece of that infrastructure. So we undertook a campaign last year in August. It went for 3 months. It was very long. And we raised 2.1 million to buy the warehouse from the landlord. Now,
were you surprised?
I was very surprised at the end because on the last day we were at 1.2 million. And if you don't reach your minimum, ours was 2 million because the sale price of the property was 1.8, and we knew that there was going to be $100,000 in land tax or property tax or whatever, and then there was going to be stamp duty, and then there was going to be another 100,000 in fees back to the equity crowdfunding platform Pledge Me, who we partnered with. And so it was like, we need to make more than 1.8. So we set it at 2 million. And on the last day, we're at 1.2. And half of the team was on the phone to ASIC, which is the Australian Security Investment Commission, to try and change the laws to reduce the minimum down to 1.2 so that we could actually keep some of that money that was being pledged. But at 3:00 that day, they found out that no, it's not going to happen. Plan B is not Plan B. And so Robert and I, while those guys were doing that, Robert and I just got onto the phones and just chased up every cold lead that we'd established, and eventually got over the line at 5:30 that afternoon. We hit the 2 million mark. So it was a very exciting last day.
I imagine.
And I guess at the time I had accepted either outcome, but it was just so incredible to see 513 members of the community pull together, and on average about $2,000 was the investment. And now we have a community-owned food hub. Oh, and the other thing was, my secret agenda was that the owners should be majority female, and we reached 85%.
Wow. So by an active...
No, it was subtle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Most of our customers are
Or
female.
How do you explain that?
I think women, well, they have a passion about food and they care more, I think. I mean, that's a big generalisation. And a lot of them do control the household budget when it comes to food. And they're good communicators. So if they've got if they're onto a good idea, they'll spread the word. Yeah, we've just got a lot of amazing women in Brisbane who are really keen to support more initiatives like this.
So for you, the fact to be able to raise so much money in such a short amount of time, does it reveal really a deep will of people to see the system change? Or do you still see it as anecdotal phenomenon? I mean, I was reading about the food scene and, seeing, for example, Amazon Go getting so big in the US and launching with success its first supermarkets. And we know Amazon relies on overproduction, overconsumption, really feeding super capitalistic system. So we see both trains going in parallel. How do you read the current state?
Yeah. It is like we're living in parallel universes at times, because we're seeing the big end of town doing crazy, really big stuff. Like, recently Monsanto was bought out by Bayer, which is like the biggest seed company being bought out by the second biggest seed company in the world. And it just seems like they're eating each other up. So I often think we just have to wait for that system to die, and we don't really pay much attention to it. What we try and do is honour what Buckminster Fuller was saying when he said, you don't solve a problem by, resisting the old system. You create a new system so that when that one dies, or when that one becomes obsolete, you have an alternative system that's productive and regenerative and is fair to everybody in the supply chain and the value chain. And so I think a lot of our customers, a lot of our investors, or careholders, as we like to call them, not shareholders, they care. They are conscious consumers at the very least, and at the most they are activists. They're food activists. They want to see change and they want to support us to do that, and they want to play a part. And by investing in it, putting your money into it is a big way to do that.
What do you see missing at the moment? What are the barriers you're facing at the moment to develop further the reach of Food Connect, getting more and more people interested in that matter?
Yeah.
Some pushback, often talking to people about, tell me, well, it's not convenient, I can't afford it. How do you manage that?
So in terms of being able to expand the business, the main issue is education and awareness. And you're right, there are segments of society that can't access our service through whether there's a skills shortage, because we've now got a few generations who don't know how to cook now, that haven't seen cooking as part of a core skill, life skill. So there's that. So when they get a box of produce, they don't know what to do with it. So the barriers, all of those things, they're all very valid for today's average consumer who's used to convenience and getting things whenever they want. In terms of affordability, we started a wholesale side of the business where we encourage householders to get together and create a buyers club or a co-op, and they get a 30% discount on their food by buying in bulk. So putting together all your spending money for food with 20 other people gives you really affordable access to our food, and it's often much, much lower than the average supermarket. And this is where the participation in the food system comes into play. And I think as people are starting to question our way of life and looking for ways to become more conscious about our choices, we're going to be seeing a lot less people working full-time and a lot more people using the time that they're not working to engage in community activities, which is why at the Food Connect shed we've opened up a whole event space so that people can start running their own events around food or politics or whatever that is. So awareness, education, affordability, skills, they're all the barriers. And for us, I guess the way for us to fix that is to get access to more markets through wholesale. So we do have plans to put on a business development person so that they can talk to organisations and institutions like hospitals and prisons and the convention centre. All of their food spend's enormous, but they are getting it very cheap from multinational companies. But there has to be some way where we can participate in that somewhere. So if we can get access to those larger markets, or indeed if those multinationals wanted to do something good, they could actually allocate 10% of their contract to supplying through us. So we're working on that as a strategy in terms of growing the business. And then, of course, the other side of things is when you're a social enterprise, you have no marketing budget. It's usually the last thing that you have money for. So if a fairy godmother would come along and give us a good marketing budget, that would be awesome, because then we could actually design a customer journey that suits people for where they're at in life and just help them take on that journey, hold their hand a little bit. At the moment, we don't have the resources to do that, and we really do rely on our core group of customers who really get it and have the skills and the money to be able to participate.
You were mentioning growing. So is it compatible with sustainable farming and things like that?
Our farmers are screaming at us to increase the volume. So we have 80 farmers we have a relationship with across the southeast Queensland bioregion, and any one week we would probably get 20 farmers participating. So it just depends on the season. So they would love, a lot of them are very small and they're happy with just supplying us and doing their own farmers market on the weekend. But there are a handful of really big farmers that we deal with, certified organic farmers, who would love to get away from the central markets if we could grow our demand.
Eater base, yeah.
So there is definitely capacity there. And there's this concept that we're looking into at the moment called Ag in the Middle. So they're farmers who aren't corporate farmers supplying big markets, export markets, and they're not small niche farmers. They're actually the farmers in Australia at the moment who are kind of in the middle, and they've been told to get big or get out. They haven't been able to get big. They're heavily reliant on the central markets. They have a lot of issues with contracts and not being paid, and they would love to get away from the supermarket system, but they do have quite a big volume and they're still farming conventionally. So what we would love to do is to work with those farmers in the middle to help them convert over to organic, natural, ecological methods of farming, which can be done. It just takes time. So being able to sustain their livelihood while they do that over a period of 3 to 5 years is really important, but also provide them with a market. So that's sort of the big challenge, because at the moment they're not interested in us because we're too small. They're not interested in converting over because it's too expensive, but they know that they have to take action. They can see their land losing soil. They can see the effects of the drought. So they'll be faced with the choice of either walking off or converting over and trying again. Yeah.
When you developed your car share system, that the council at the time was not interested at all and didn't actually get it. In your relationship with the council now, with the totally different market and different sector, so do you feel there's more response?
I think they're on a journey. When we talk about the council, what we forget is that the Brisbane City Council has been and still is highly politicised. The bureaucracy is highly politicised. There's lots of interfering going on politically, internally, and really it's to drive the development agenda. So we have to be careful not to demonise the council officers internally who are doing the work and really wanting to see change and doing the best that they can with the limited power that they have. And I feel that they are making progress. For example, our local school has a community garden on site, which is managed by the community, not the school, and it's just been made a composting hub, an official Brisbane City Council composting hub for the local community. So I see things like that and I go, okay, we're getting there, but it's really not fast enough. If you look at the crisis that we're currently facing. This morning coming in, I heard on the radio that there's towns around Bundaberg who have been affected by the bushfires, whose roads have been completely cut off and they've run out of food.
Oh,
like this whole townships,
yeah.
just no access to food because the roads are cut off. We need to get smart about relocalising some of our food supply. You're never going to do all of it, but you do what you can with what you've got. And community gardens and allotments and rooftop gardens and urban farming are perfect solutions for those immediate needs straight after a disaster.
Kylie Newberry, that I received just in the previous episode, was mentioning the Victoria Park project and potentially something going there as a urban farm, but still the project hasn't been released. And what they've showcased so far was mostly entertainment stuff, things that have not much to do with bringing back the food. Closer to the city, but
it's tricky. It's not sexy because it's seen as hard work and messy and smelly and all of those things. And we have Northey Street City Farm, which is a great place to learn about urban farming and probably needs more support than what it's currently receiving from the local council. And I think some of the problem sometimes is that, yes, bring on urban farming, let's do it, but let's also support the organisations that have been doing it for like 20, 30 years, that have been struggling with very little resources. You know, imagine if we gave those places some investment and really helped them take it to the next level, you know, because they've got all the knowledge, they've got all the skills. You're not reinventing the wheel.
Let's not reinvent the wheel, yeah.
The other thing, I guess, that's really, that what we don't often think about is land ownership in the city. And often people see a place like a vacant allotment that's just sitting there as terra nullius, like no one owns it. But actually it was owned by the First Nations people. And according to them, they have never ceded sovereignty over that land. And so we don't even think about asking them first what should happen with that piece of land before we even engage with the local community or the council processes. So at the moment where I live, we're currently undergoing a community consultation process with the local government, with Brisbane City Council, who have plans for renewal and gentrification and whatever of our suburb. Yet there is not one First Nations person on the community committee, and their excuse was, well, they didn't come forward. And I said, well, they're not trying hard enough. They need to go out and seek those people because, again, like the farmers, there's zero trust between Aboriginal people and government officers. So they're not going to come forward and engage in a government process if they know that. So we've got a lot of work to do around all of that, around land, who owns it, how we engage First Nations people, how we learn from First Nations people.
I think you are engaging them somehow in the Food Connect.
Yes. So the Food Connect Foundation is sort of our not-for-profit where we try and do all the education and advocacy work. And we've got Gala Watson, who's a local Birragubba Kungaloo woman who is on our board. So she's been helping us a great deal in turning our minds onto the issues of Aboriginal sovereignty. And actually we've just taken a whole bunch of our care holders and a few of our tenants at the shed through a cultural capability training with First Nations elders.
Do they have very different views from a westernised way of thinking?
Completely. So what we've learned through that process is that the Western system of governance and government is and the way we are conditioned to think is very survivalist. You go in, you conquer a place, and then you defend it to survive. Whereas First Nations people have a relationship, an abundance mentality. You know, it's about sharing, it's about building relationships first and foremost. And Mary Graham explains it beautifully. She says, you know, we've got two systems of law. The first system is the most important, and it's about how you conduct yourself as a human in a community of people, and it's our moral code. So if you break that moral code, then we go into the second system, which is the rules and the punishments. Whereas in Western society, we've just got the second system. We've got rules and punishments. There's no moral law. We've kind of outsourced that to religion over the years, and to other things like consumerism, materialism, but there is no moral code for you as an individual to know exactly how should I behave in this situation? Who should I be listening to? Who should I respect? There's none of that. We are flying blind when it comes to behaving in the correct way in order to look after the land and look after each other. So no wonder these two systems are clashing. I guess at the end of the day, we had one attendee who was really, really frustrated because all of a sudden it dawned on her how difficult it's going to be able to integrate the systems. And Mary Graham said, just connect to the land and let the land teach you what needs to be taught and look after each other and stay local. And so for me, that really affirmed a lot of the things that I've felt in my gut for a very long time, is that, yes, we can be concerned about climate change. It's a global issue, but we act local. We act within our sphere of influence, and where we can get the most reward and the most benefit and the most love and the most community is at the local level.
Talking about climate change, technology often appears as a magic wand. Talk obviously about transitioning fully to renewable energy, but also capturing carbon, all sorts of things that we could do, technology-based things to tackle climate change. In the food sphere and at your scale, do you feel technology has a role to play? And are the farmers working with Food Connect adept of a tech-driven permaculture, for example?
Our farmers are very lo-fi. They use a lot of traditional methods of farming. There's some that have interesting monitoring systems to help them. There's, some who are very interested in soil and measuring microbes and nutritional density of different types of produce and the like. There is a sense of some technology being used, but it doesn't rule the way they do things. It's very humanised, our food system. It doesn't mean we're anti-technology because, for example, this open-sourced open food network that helps create direct links between the eater and the farmer through transparency all the way along from purchase to delivery, that helps because it's an education tool as much as it is a facilitator of e-commerce. I guess when technology can be used for good in terms of communication, creating community, sharing information, then it has its place, but it definitely isn't the solution. And I think we know that deep down, all of us, because there have been times where we've put all of our faith into technology, and we have as a business, and it has led to disaster on occasions, just testing out different things. So it's I think it can be a distraction at times, and I think it's a little bit the way we see the government in some ways. It's like, oh, good, technology will fix it. Oh, good, the government will make the decision and fix everything. I think in Australia we've just become so complacent and comfortably numb about other people fixing other things for us and outsourcing the problem that we've just become very lazy when it comes to finding solutions.
You mentioned a few times the importance of relocalizing things. For the American farmer activist Wendell Berry, the revitalization of local food economies is the strongest counter to a system that puts profit before human health, culture and the environment. And that's what you advocate at the level of Food Connect. In a way, you have a very political project. Is it something you're comfortable with, the fact that your project and your organization is very political? Do you feel sometimes that, you share pretty openly your beliefs, your values, your political views? Is it something that sometimes you're caught with thinking, am I putting the organization at risk? Or do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do completely see what you mean. And it's been something that we've struggled with over the years. I guess food should be viewed as apolitical because everyone needs to eat. But also in terms of the system, what you're eating directly supports the system that you want to support. And you need to know that. The personal is political, in my view. Every choice you make has a consequence. And we're finding that out in the fashion industry. We're finding that out in all sorts of ways that we spend our money. So I feel that you can't separate politics from what you do every day. You just can't. And if you try to, you end up just going mad.
Losing yourself.
Well, you do. And you make compromises and then you try and it doesn't mean that we don't talk to people and have open conversations. And I think we need to learn how to talk to each other in a really respectful way and listen to each other, because often what's under those surface arguments are basic needs or basic traits that we all have as humans, which is fear or a need of some sort, whether it's shelter or acceptance or belonging or whatever that is. So often if you scratch the surface in these conversations and take the time to really listen and go deeper, then we're all actually after the same thing at the end of the day. And most of us would agree with...
so you never find yourself censoring yourself? That's good.
No, I used to, but it just didn't feel right. So I'm like, well, I just can't, life's too short. We're in a climate emergency, people.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, we need to be
just
more
feeling
political, if anything.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the social enterprise concept. And there's some social enterprises out there that put themselves in a degrowth paradigm. They clearly advocate for system change, promoting the fact that we can build a society that it's not about consumption and production, and which is within the limits of our ecosystem. And others subscribe to a paradigm of green capitalism. Where do you see yourself?
Social enterprise, by definition, is a business. It's a business that exists to solve a problem. So it has a mission or a purpose. But to achieve that purpose, they trade in either a service or a good, and then whatever profit they make, if they make a profit, they actually redistribute that back into furthering the mission. So that last point is a little bit contentious, because there's lots of different ways that people want to use their profit. And some people say just if they're delivering on the purpose through their business model, then they should be able to get the benefits of the profit as well, which is fair enough. But so that's the definition of social enterprise. And we've got a whole spectrum of enterprises at Queensland Social Enterprise Council that fit that perfectly, or some version of it. And we don't want to exclude anyone right now, because we still feel that the dominant business as usual system is still strong. So if anyone wants to kind of lean a little bit towards being a less no growth, more conscious consumerism, then we're happy to have that conversation with them. And they're on a journey. So yes, I was advocating earlier that we need to grow our business to satisfy our farmers' needs. And that's true, because they all have financial commitments and debts to pay and money to invest in increasing biodiversity. It doesn't come free when you want to plant trees and look after your waterways. So people do need to be paid for their hard work. And if you look at your supply chain and all of the materials that you're using, and you do that in a conscious way. So for example, at Food Connect, we've never bought anything new. Paper is probably what we buy new, and the paper that we buy is recycled or forest certified. So it's really tough, because when you're trying to run a business, there are a lot of costs and a lot of overheads, and you have to make really hard choices about where you can compromise in order for the business to be successful. So no one's ever going to be perfect. And you could have a completely perfect enterprise that is totally focused on degrowth or no growth or circular economy, yet the founders are flying all over the world, do whatever, speak at conferences, which I've just done. And yeah, like I haven't flown overseas for 10 years. This was my first overseas trip for 10 years, and I had to really think hard about whether or not I would do that. So it was tough, but you know what? So many people don't even think about that. They wouldn't even give it a second thought. I do believe in no growth. Absolutely, I feel like there should be no waste. There is no such thing as waste. You know, it's all a resource that needs to be used all along the supply chain. Doesn't matter what business you're in. I think that the trick for social enterprise is to understand that social enterprise isn't the answer. It's not going to solve climate change. It's not going to solve capitalism. I guess some people was at the Social Enterprise World Forum recently was saying that social enterprise is a softer form of capitalism. And that is true in many respects. When you see some of the social enterprises out there who, especially the ones which is like buy one, donate one, that sort of stuff. It's sort of, or the thank you waters or the who gives a crap, you know, like it's up to the founders or the runners of that organisation to decide what happens to the profit. It's not really circular in any way. But I think the conversation is alive and well, and I think that social enterprise is starting to realise that, yes, it is shining a light on some really dark places in capitalism, in the system, and trying to solve those problems where there's been market failure. But replacing another product with another product isn't going to solve our problems. It is one of the things that can help us transition to a no-growth economy, to a stable economy.
Do you still have some guilty purchases in the food area?
Not very often, because I've taught myself over the years and educated myself. But when you go out with people and socialise, you really have no choice. And
Yes,
you don't want to
that's true.
be...
The catering, the things
Yeah,
like
all of
yeah.
that. Like, you know, I'm mostly vegetarian and I've been to 2 corporate type events in the last 2 days, and you don't get it. They didn't even give you a choice for vegetarian. It was chicken or beef. So I have to just accept that sometimes it's not in my control, and that's okay, as long as I, as an individual, do my best. I feel guilty a lot of the times for not growing my own food in my backyard.
Yes.
Because it's so easy to get Food Connect food for me. So it almost is like, well, do I really need to grow my own food? I'll just support Food Connect.
Yeah.
So it's a bit tricky. I often think, gosh, if people come to my house, they're probably expecting herb gardens and fruit trees and blah, blah, blah. No, none of that happens. Just lots of big dirt holes where my dog likes to dig up holes in the backyard all the time. So, yeah.
You were saying 75% of your careholders were women?
85, yeah.
85. So we'll talk a little bit about women and the food industry. There's numerous FAO reports which show the importance of women empowerment in order to foster a sustainable agriculture system, actually to tackle climate change as a whole. Women education is shown as one of the primary goals to achieve that. How are you involving women in the Food Connect journey? Do you have a specific direction about that?
We don't actually specifically go out with a feminist agenda, but the way things have gone and the way I think we talk about the food system and the way we talk about Food Connect to our community means that we do attract a lot of female participants.
Yeah. Indirectly.
Indirectly.
That happens.
Yeah. So, for example, most of our city cousins, which are drop-off people who volunteer to open their home up once a week to become a drop-off pickup point, most of them are women. There's a few retired men in there. And the farmers themselves, actually, farmers are often seen mostly as male, but most of our farmers are couples. And actually most of the conversations that we have on the phone over price and what's available and all of that is with the female side of the farming operation. Yeah. So I just feel like just the nature and the essence of the business itself and the way we talk about the food system and food in general does attract. It's non-threatening, it's community-oriented, it's open and welcoming, and it offers a place. It offers, if someone wants to participate, we go, yes, how would you like to do that? We're happy to facilitate or support, what you want to do. And our community kitchen is mostly made up of micro enterprises that are run by women. So it's sort of, it's almost like a byproduct of the model, but it's a new form of economy, and it does challenge patriarchal views about the food system.
In defending your ideas out there and participating to conferences and talks and things like that, have you been confronted to forms of sexism?
Not overtly, but it's always there. Like, you can pick it up pretty quickly when it happens.
Mansplaining.
I mean, yeah, mansplaining. I think I'm pretty scary now, now that I'm old and I have grey hair. And I've got these lines in my forehead where you can tell really easily when I'm not happy with a comment.
That's convenient.
or a statement. So I just have to give people a look, and they know that they don't cross that line. So but yeah, I mean, when I was younger, of course, it was just, I worked a lot in hospitality when I was studying at university, and it was just rife. I remember one day one of the barmen coming up to me saying, "Oh, you made it to the top 10. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, we rate us boys right to the CEO of this organisation. We have a rating system for the best looking females in our business, and you made it into the top 10. I was like, really? Is that so? It has always been there. I think men are becoming a lot more aware of well, certainly in my circles, and
Yes.
I do acknowledge that I am in a little bit of a bubble where there's a lot of progressive men around me. But I think if we understand at the end of the day that we're all human and we just respect each other for being human regardless of gender persuasions, then we hold that. We hold people to account on that stuff when it comes up, then I think we're slowly improving.
How do you think women can gain more influence? Do you believe in positive discrimination policies?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think we've got no other choice because the system is so locked in.
Yeah, it would take so much time.
Yeah,
to get there.
and you know, you can argue the same thing with diversity, you know, like with equal representation of First Nations people, of people from an ethnic background in Australia, anything other than Anglo-Saxon. We can have quotas for those. We can have benchmarks by which to run an organisation. We're okay at that. It does require a lot of extra thinking and strategising and support networks, and we've employed a few Aboriginal employees recently. One really young guy, he just doesn't know what he wants to do, so he doesn't turn up when he should and stuff like that. But that happens to all 17-year-olds, not exclusive to Indigenous people. So I think we just need to treat everyone with respect and acknowledge that everyone's different points in their lives are going to have issues.
When you observe the politics in Australia, the lies, the climate change denial that we are seeing with the comments on the bushfires, how do you keep being hopeful for the future?
It's difficult. I always think of when I first came across climate change, when it first really hit me, the first thing I did was I got John Seed and Ruth Rosenheck up to do their deep ecology work, where they create a safe space and they give people in the room permission to grieve. It's quite a long process, but quite a transformative process. What I really took from that was, and I always remind myself about it, is that you can despair. It's okay to despair. And in fact, you can despair 10 times a day, but don't use that despair to paralyse yourself, or don't use it as an excuse for inaction. What it actually is the frontal cortex that we've developed as a species of your survival mechanism. And your survival mechanism is telling us that something needs to be done. So we need to use that despair to take action, to really question what we're doing here, right now, right in this moment. What can I be doing to take action? And then it's in the action, it's in the doing that gives you hope, because that requires you to talk to people. It requires you to collaborate. It requires you to problem solve. Connection is, and action is what gives me hope. And the other thing, I guess, just from a very existentialist point of view, is that, well, maybe as a species we've just really stuffed it up, and that's our that's our destiny. But also having the perspective that humans think they can control everything. There is very little that we can control. The only thing that we can control is how we think about situations. Sure, climate change is happening. The evidence is all around us. How do we think about that? We can choose to think about it negatively, we can choose to think about it positively, and everything in between. And wherever you are on that spectrum, you can oscillate between both of those in one day, which I often do. And it's okay. That's part of being human. We have feelings for a reason.
So I shared with you an article published in The Conversation called Farmers, Murder and the Media Getting to the Bottom of a City-Country Divide. And so to explain a little bit the context of this article is about Glenn Turner, a compliance environment officer who in 2014 was murdered by a farmer in New South Wales in a confrontation of land clearing laws. So those laws, the media at the time had really propagated the image of a poor farmer at the mercy of laws enforced by out-of-touch city elites. And since then, land clearing laws have actually been mostly abandoned, and which leads to the situation we are facing now. Eastern Australia is one of the world's deforestation hotspots, the drought, the bushfires, etc., etc. So in discourses, we often hear that strong opposition between city and the rural population. At Food Connect level, how do you see this cohabitation happening? Is it something always peaceful and that works well? Or do you observe confrontation, opposition of ideas, of philosophies?
No. I mean, I think it helps that Robert was a farmer himself.
Yes.
So if there's ever been any issues or confrontation or conflict in any of between our workers and farmers or customers and farmers, then Rob is pretty good at, balancing those conversations out. But I think this is an extreme case. Having said that, there is a segment of our farming community, not ours, I'm pretty confident in saying, that really believe that they have every right to do whatever they want to their land, and it's not up to the government to just tell them what to do. They are very influenced by those extreme media outlets like Alan Jones and Andrew Bolt, Miranda Devine. Like, I stood through the Greens once and I was talking to some farmers out at near Toowoomba, and they were fighting a coal seam gas project. And Christine Milne was leader of the Greens at that point, and she's an ex-dairy farmer herself. So she was able to reach a lot of farmers really well. So I was talking to these farmers and they said, oh, look, we love everything. All of your policies are fantastic, but we'll never vote Green. And I said, why? And they said, because we're Catholics and we don't believe in gay marriage. Not dealing with just politics. You're dealing with religious beliefs. You're dealing with this so-called right to do whatever they can with their land. And that's why they ignore the Indigenous issues. They just ignore them. They don't even, because they know that they would never win an argument for a start. But they truly believe that they have every right to that land, that God put them there, and they should do whatever they want to do with it. So, of course, you're going to have compliance officers when they're trying to enforce the law not understanding this fully and just trying to do the right thing. And they're walking straight into this trap almost, So it's not good. And what we're seeing these days is huge migrations from the country into the city. So there's less and less people who really understand what's going on out there. And we're so disconnected from the source of our food. We don't know what a farmer does day to day and how hard it is for them. And a lot of them aren't really educated either in the ways that city people are educated and exposed to different cultures and opportunities to learn. I mean, I remember I love being in the city because he's a redneck Catholic from Western Victoria, dairy farming family, and he can go into the city and meet gay people and have a decent conversation with them. And he would never be able to do that at the pub in Colac. So I feel like with the increasing urbanisation of our cities, there's less and less understanding of what is actually going out there in the country. And the media loves to sensationalise those divides, and they make things worse. And it doesn't provide a platform for us to have respectful conversation with each other about it.
Do you feel this is just a minority, those farmers who are actually so protective of their land and just extremely conservative?
No, it's probably not a minority. I think our farmers are probably in the minority in terms of, being fairly progressive in their growing practices and their worldviews. But I think there are an increasing number of farmers starting to wake up, particularly the farmers that are directly connected to the Great Barrier Reef and climate change and what their farming practices are doing to the water. The extremes are getting to the point where they are acknowledging, like I was watching Landline a few weeks ago, and the question was to a Western Queensland cattle farmer. There's farmers selling their properties and moving to Tasmania to escape the drought. Would you do that now? And he said, well, if you had have asked me 10 years ago what I know now, then probably yes, but now it's too late. He said, I didn't believe in climate change back then, but now I do, and I am stuck, and I'm not going to get anything for my property if I sell it now. And so he's acknowledging, starting to, they have no choice. It's too late. They have to acknowledge that it's an issue, and that their farming practices, while they might have been relevant for 3-4 generations, suddenly need to change.
The second article I shared was a comment of Greta Thunberg, who said that Trump's extreme climate change denial was helping in the environmental movement. Are you in agreement with that? Do you feel that extreme discourses about climate change help the cause?
I don't know if it would help the cause. I think what it does is it just confirms the distrust in leaders. So I feel like we're now at a stage where, and the evidence is coming through to show this, that the trust, that generally the public's trust in institutions, like our political parties, our governments, universities, experts, whatever it is. It's banks, churches. Our trust in institutions is at an all-time low, and people like Donald Trump and Scott Morrison confirm it with their little bubbles of crazy comments. And it confirms that those positions of power sort of almost beyond ideology now. It's more about just helping their buddies out and staying in power, and as long as they can help each other out, they'll stay in power. So it's even beyond ideology. If you took the true meaning of being a conservative, then you would conserve nature because you would know that it was a valuable resource. Well, that's not evident. So they're not even living true to their own values in many respects.
Would you have a read, a film, a podcast, a cultural reference you would like to share with our listeners that inspired you?
I think the book that has mostly had a massive impact on me personally in the last few years is Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. Charlie Massey's book, Call of the Reed Warbler, is another beautiful book, beautifully written, and it's about regenerative agriculture and healing the land through generative practices. I like listening to Impact Boom, which is a local podcast here in Brisbane, and Tom interviews all sorts of entrepreneurs and people in the ecosystem about social enterprise. I actually reread Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy recently again, and it's just as relevant today as it was back in the 80s, and it's such a great view on life and the universe and everything.
Thanks very much, Emma,
Thanks,
for
Roxanne.
our conversation.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. To find out more about Food Connect and the food system they have created and all the references mentioned in this episode, check out our website, gosimon.org. If you liked this episode and think someone else would too, please share it. Let's spread the word about all the things we can do to collectively tackle climate change.